course, he was sent to seek and to save that which was lost, and that's our privilege and obligation as well, to do that which Jesus has sent us for, to share the gospel, to seek and to save that which is lost. And the Gospel of John is clearly a message to seek and to save. The one who was sent for us is Jesus himself. He sends us the same capacity. If you have your Bibles, I want to have you turn to John chapter 5, the 7 miracles that Jesus is reported having done during the month, or during the approximately a year or so of John's Gospel. He records them with incrementally increasing power, intensity. As the Lord increases in popularity and his knowledge, people knowing about him in the community, in the area of Galilee and Jerusalem and so forth, his popularity increases, so does the power, the intensities of these 7 miracles that John presents for us. The first, of course, we talked about a few weeks ago, was the wedding feast in Galilee, in Galilee, in Cana, where he turned the water into wine. There, it was a creation miracle that brought great joy. Of course, the celebration of joy was there as well. The second was last week we talked about a nobleman's son who was sick. Also, it was in Cana where he met this nobleman, but his son was 25 miles away in Capernaum, and yet Jesus simply spoke the word, and at that very moment his son was healed. I didn't mention that at the time, but I realized that should give us great comfort. That should give us a real encouragement as a believer, knowing that Jesus doesn't have to physically be standing in front of us to do a great miracle on our behalf. When we pray, when we ask him for something, when there's a need in our life, we can pray. And he seems like he's a far off away. He's not present physically, of course. But we can know that just by speaking the word, by uttering the word for us on our behalf, and by the way, he is doing that. He's praying on our behalf. He will bring forth miracles for us and really respond to us. Now we're looking at the third miracle John records, and that is a miracle of a sick man. We don't know what kind of sickness he had, but he's a sick man laying by the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem, and here he gives healing and also conflict. Because at this point, there's a turning point. We've seen great things done in Jerusalem before. There were great miracles. The Jews saw that. Now, they were not recorded by John, but he says great works or signs going on there. And the folks went back to Galilee because they've seen those signs. They wanted to see Jesus do miracles for them as well. But here's a turning point on this third miracle. It turns to persecution and controversy beginning at this point from here on. Really from this point on the rest of his life, the rest of his ministry until the cross. Mounting each day towards Jesus from this instance onward. Now read with me, if you would, John chapter 5, beginning with verse 1, the first 9 verses. If you don't have a Bible with you, there should be one next to that hymnal in front of you. You can probably follow along with that if you would. John chapter 5, after this, or after these things, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is at Jerusalem by the sheep market, or sheep gate, a pool, which is called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda, having 5 porches or porticos. In these lay a great multitude of impotent or sick folk, of blind, halt, and withered. And we're going to stop right there and skip down to verse 5. And a certain man was there which had an infirmity 38 years. And Jesus saw him lie, and knew that he had been now a long time in that case. He saith unto him, Wilt thou be made whole? And the impotent man answered him, Sir, I have no man, when the water is troubled, to put me into the pool, but while I am coming, another steppeth down before me. Jesus saith unto him, Rise, take up thy bed, and walk. And immediately the man was made whole, and took up his bed, and walked. And on the same day was the Sabbath. It was the Sabbath day. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. John has been meticulous up to this point in his gospel, the first four chapters, in giving details of the time element. Every time he said, and this was the second miracle. And all along the way, the time element is very clear to this point. Now he begins this chapter with an indefinite time. After this, or after these things that were going on, whatever event was, He doesn't really tell us when. Sometime after this happened, which is okay. No, not a big deal. He just suddenly says after these things, he travels to Jerusalem up to a feast. Now we presume this feast is one of 3 feasts, but probably the Passover. Could have been one of the other feasts that were in Jerusalem. They were Jewish men within 15-mile radius were required to come to these 3 feasts. Come into Jerusalem to celebrate. And Passover was one in which people from all over, even up in Galilee, would come to the Passover. We think it probably is. And if this is the great Galilean ministry which we spoke of last week, which is about a 1.5 year period of time up in the northern regions of Galilee, he spent that time preaching, teaching, and healing. We don't know where this falls in that category because in that 1.5 he stayed up in that region, according to the other Gospels. So it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when Jesus made this trip. Some commentators switched the chapters 5 and 6 and said, well, 6 must have happened before chapter 5. I don't know if we want to do that, but it would follow sequentially or in a chronological order in a better way. But anyway, Jesus shows up in Jerusalem in this chapter here, noting that there in verse 2, a sheep market or a sheep gate, where there was a pool called in the Hebrew tongue Bethesda. The emphasis here, we find in this chapter, and we're going to cover it through verse 18 here today, 2 movements, 2 emphases in this account of the healing at Bethesda's pool. There's the miracle of the healing, first of all, in the first 9 verses we read about. Then there's also the hostility created as a result of the miracle. As I said, some problems develop here. Persecution begins to develop. The hatred, the controversy about Jesus just gets stirred up at this point from here on. And there's hostility in the last 9 verses we'll look at. First, the miracle itself. Look at verses 1 to 9, containing us 4 striking elements of the story. First of all, it's the man in need in verse 5. A certain man, we don't know who he was, he's not named, was there which had an infirmity, a sickness, for 38 years. He had been in this condition for 38 years. That's most of his lifetime, probably, if not his whole lifetime. And we don't know what the illness was. He was perhaps either lame, had some sickness that physically did not allow him to do things in a rapid manner. He couldn't get up, couldn't move, couldn't get to the water, for instance. Now check the setting here. Again, it's in Jerusalem, verses 1 to 3, the sheep gate pool, or Bethesda, which literally means in Aramaic, a house of outpouring, a house of mercy. Now that was this place. Now we skipped a verse and a half here, last part of verse 3 and verse 4. Earliest manuscripts, in the King James it has it here, but in the earliest manuscripts of the New Testament, these 2 passages were left out. They were omitted. Basically explaining about an angel that went down at a certain season into the pool, troubled the waters, and if whoever got in first after the water was stirred up was healed. This apparently was a legend, a superstition in that day, or at least the years following. And we skip those because probably in the original text it was not there. We say that because the best text, the closest, the oldest text, don't show the verses. Now how did they get there? And one reason we don't think it was probably in there and written by John, because there are 3 Greek words that John doesn't use in any other writings. So somebody who added it from another passage. And John never references angels during Jesus' earthly ministry. Now he does in the book of Revelation for it. But he doesn't mention angels, so it's an odd addition thrown in here. The ancient historian Tertullian, who lived 150 years after Christ, referred to the superstition of an angel stirring up water. The earliest texts, some of these early texts, show the verses with a footnote or marginal note with this statement. And the church copyists, the scribes who wrote and copied, simply added that to the margin. And as years went on, perhaps the marginal note was just added into the text. Technical term for that is a gloss. That means it's inserted into the text. And that's not a problem. There are situations like this where there are other passages in John 8 where we're not sure that John wrote that. It's there for us. It's not a problem because the message is the same. And whether it was a legend, whether or not, whether it was added later, the truth is the man did get in or try to get in when the water was stirred up, whether it was a natural stirring or a supernatural. Here's a sick man, 38 years in his sickness. He probably lost all hope that he would ever be helped or ever cured. There was no help. He had no strength. He had no hope and no possibility for a cure until Jesus shows up. And then in verse 6, we see a question by Jesus. Isn't that interesting? Jesus, first of all, knew the man had been there a long time. How he knew, obviously he's the Son of God. He would know these things. Knew the man had been there a long time. He saith unto him, wilt thou be made whole? That's the question. First the man himself, then the question is, would you like to be made whole? Do you want to be well? Whole there is the same word we use here. Well, cured, whole. The word for do you wish or wilt thou really is a word which says do you desire, do you want to be made whole? And again, it sounds like a foolish question. Who in the world would ask a question from a man who is sitting by the water here, hoping to somehow get into the pool and be healed? Why would Jesus in any way ask the question, do you want to be healed? Wilt thou be made whole? And from the human standpoint, it sounds like a foolish question, but not from Jesus' standpoint. You see, there's much more to this. What else would this man be doing in the pool, we say? Sometimes, it's more convenient to play the invalid, to play the sick person. And this man would probably say, well, yeah, I'm enjoying this. Things are pretty bad, but I can lay here by the pool. I can get handouts from folks. I get the sympathy of people and receive sympathy. And sometimes there's that attitude, well, I'll just stay right here and enjoy it. The state of my life I'm in. For sympathy, for not being weighed down with responsibility. He didn't have any responsibility. He didn't have to look out for anybody else because everybody looked out for him. For financial help, people would give him money perhaps. So sometimes it's just as easy to, or even more advantageous, to not seek help, to not desire to be made well. In other words, he was perhaps playing a game. And Jesus may have pointed that out to him. Do you really want to be made well? Or are you just playing a game? What about you? The same question can be asked of every one of us. Do you really want to be made whole? Now we think of physical sickness here, but you and I, we sit in church, we come regularly, but we never respond to Christ. We never give our life to Him. We never surrender in faith to the Lord Jesus Christ. He asks us to be born again, and we sort of say, oh yeah, that's something, we did that as a kid. And we never really made a commitment to Christ. We never really surrendered ourselves because it's more convenient to be looked upon as, well, folks pray for me and they spend time with me and they really try to reach me, and we're just playing a religious game. You really want to be made whole in Christ. You really want what Christ can provide for you, not just the physical healing, but a spiritual, total remakeover of your life to give you brand new life. A whole and complete life that He provides, a spiritual life. A connection with Him that will someday take you into the eternal heavens with Him, to live with Him forever. Or are you just playing games? It's the same question we should receive as well. Wilt thou be made whole? Well, this man couldn't figure out why he was asking this in verse 7. He said, I have no man, no person, no human being, when the water is troubled, and whether it's a natural or a supernatural troubling of the water, to put me into the pool, but while I'm coming, another steps down in front of me or before me. Someone is always there before me. I don't have the strength. I don't have the energy, or I just don't have anybody to help me to get into the water for the healing. He didn't answer the question if you notice. He didn't say, yes, I want to. He said, he made an excuse. Nobody will help me. Jesus will help him. Verse 8. Jesus saith unto him, rise, take up thy bed, and walk. The third thing here is this command. Jesus commands. Notice there are three of them. We focus on the one, but there are three. Rise, which was impossible. Take up your bed, which is also impossible for the man in his condition. And walk, which is also impossible in his condition. He could not do any of these three commands that Jesus was asking him apart from Jesus' power to do so. Take up thy bed. The word for bed is kerbatos. Means a mattress or a stretcher type thing that the poor people sleep on. Just the most rudimentary mat that you'd roll up perhaps. A pallet we would call it today. That's what it was. And Jesus simply commands him, get up, take up your bed, take up your pallet, and walk. Three things that were absolutely impossible for this man unless a miracle occurred, and it just did. By the word of Jesus. We remember the man who last time Jesus spoke the word, and 25 miles away, the word brought healing to the son. The boy was there about to die. Just the word of Jesus, the word spoken, and he's well. The word spoken here, Jesus didn't touch him, didn't put his hands over him, didn't have people pray over him. He just said, right, get up. Do the things I'm saying to you right now. And he actually did. And immediately, verse 9 says, immediately. Not over time, not sequentially and slowly and going through all that. No, right away. The man was made whole. Took up his bed as he was asked to do. And he walked. He did all three of the things Jesus asked him to do. And it wasn't really him doing it. It was the power of Christ working in him. The final thing, though, we see in this narrative, the final element here, is the last part of verse 9 that John points out. It is the Sabbath day. The same day was the Sabbath day. Now, this is interesting. Why didn't this is going to stir some folks up for Jesus to heal someone on the Sabbath day. Now, Sabbath is Saturday, not Sunday. We think of Sabbath, we say, oh, we're going to preach on the Sabbath. No, Sabbath is Saturday. We don't worship on the Sabbath. We worship on the Lord's Day, the first day of the week, Sunday. But in those days, Sabbath day was set apart. God said was to be a rest day. You're not to work. And of course, the Jewish people added things to help you out, supposedly. But didn't Jesus know if he did something like this on the Sabbath day, a day that the Jews were looking for reason to blame him, didn't he know probably that would stir up a problem? Couldn't Jesus have said, well, I'm going to wait till the next day. I'll wait till the day after. Then we'll do this healing. It was almost as if Jesus purposely chose the Sabbath day. And I believe he did, for two reasons. First of all, for the immediacy, that instantly wanting to help the man. Now, that was his desire, to help the man. He didn't care about the days and that sort of thing, but he instantly wanted to bring help and healing to this man. But then he also wanted to do something else. He wanted to contest or put into the face of these folks the burdensome obstacles these Jewish leaders had put upon the people. You see, these were added rules that were driving people away from God and the purposes of God. The rules you had to do to obey the Sabbath requirement. You see, rabbinical Judaism in those days had twisted the purpose of the Sabbath. It was a day of rest. God said from the beginning in chapter 1 of Genesis, chapter 2 of Genesis, He rested on the Sabbath day. And all the commandments for the Sabbath day were a day of rest. Not a day of worship, not a day of gathering, a day of rest. Ceasing of work. And it was God's gift to the Jewish people, the Israelites. And by the way, that's why we don't celebrate the Sabbath. We're not Israelites, we're not Jewish. He gave that as a gift to them. And established that they might perpetuate that through all the years, to honor God, to do what He asked them to do. It was to be a gift. They turned it into a burden. They added rules and requirements. And from that point on, they wanted to kill Jesus. It's interesting that Jesus pointed out in other places about the Sabbath day. In fact, he was going through the grain fields. All the other Gospels talk about going through the grain fields with his disciples. You know what they did? They reached out and grabbed some grain and ate it as they went, and it was the Sabbath day. And the Jews got mad about that. Said, you can't do that on the Sabbath day. You're walking and you're eating and you're doing these things on the Sabbath day. And Jesus pointed out that he was the Lord of the Sabbath. If he is the creator of this universe, which he is, and the days of creation, the 6 days, and the seventh day he rested, Jesus was the one who rested. And he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And that you can bring healing to someone. You can help someone. If your ox falls in a ditch on the Sabbath, you can pull it out. That's not considered work. But the importance here is not so much the miracle as the dialogue, the interaction that followed the miracle. Look at the second movement here, the hostility that was created as a result. Look at verses 10 through 18. The criticism first of the man. The Jews therefore said unto him that was cured, it is the Sabbath day. It's not lawful for thee to carry thy bed. Now think about it a second. This man had been on the street corner, laying there for 38 years. They obviously knew who he was. They obviously knew his problem, and now he's not having that problem anymore. They were more concerned about what he was violating the Sabbath than the fact his condition had changed. They weren't impressed by his healing at all. They wanted to see him not do what they thought he had to do on the Sabbath day. They were more concerned about Sabbath breaking than the joy and the wonder of a man suddenly being healed. His answer, notice his answer in verse 11, he that made me whole, the same said unto me, take up thy bed and walk. And I have a feeling this man was thinking this, if that man who healed me, and he didn't know who it was, if he has the power to heal me, he must have a greater power and a greater authority than these Sabbath police, these folks who were making sure we follow the rules of the Sabbath day. But you see, what had happened is these leaders, these Jewish Pharisees, scribes, and others, had destroyed the true purpose of the Sabbath. They destroyed it from a day of rest to a day of keeping all the rules. They had added 39 rules of what constituted work. You couldn't walk so many feet out of your house and be considered you're not going on a journey. You couldn't pick up a pan or do something and cook and otherwise you'd be breaking the Sabbath. Carrying a burden around on the day of the Sabbath was a violation. It was one of those 39 rules. And this man was violating. So impressed, in verse 12, they asked him, what man is it that which said unto you, take up your bed and walk? In verse 13, he didn't know. I don't know. I wish not. King James word for knowing. He that was healed didn't know who it was. Where Jesus had conveyed himself away, a multitude or a crowd being in that place. He just sort of slipped away in the crowd. The man didn't know who he was. He brought the healing. He left. He didn't know. So what happened? Well, Jesus found him. He didn't have to go hunt for Jesus because Jesus found him in the temple. Look at verse 14. Afterward, Jesus findeth him in the temple and said to him, behold, thou art made whole, even made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come upon thee. A worse thing. You know, as the man somehow continued in his sin. Now, what this is saying is somehow there was sin involved with his problem, with his sickness. Now, what it was, we don't know. Whatever it was, Jesus said, get out of it. Get away from that sin. He's saying, if you continue in your sin, you'll continue staying sick. And that's probably what happened to him for 38 years, staying in your sin. We don't know if sin had a part of his sickness, but his sickness was real. And Jesus warned of the consequences of sin, that something worse will come upon you. You know, we don't often think about the consequences of our sin. And we don't even see the connection between our sin and the consequences that happen as a result. Our broken lives, our fractured relationships, the spiritual disaster that comes in our life. We don't think about there's a connection between that sin and the result. You take drugs, you overdo alcohol, you get addicted to that stuff, and you suddenly lose your job. You think, I don't know why I lost my job. That's the reason. There's a connection. You start watching porn and get addicted to pornography, and then you lose your whole family. There's a connection. We don't see it. You're short-tempered, and all of a sudden, all your relationships are broken. You don't get along with people because of your temper. We don't think there's a connection. There's a connection. There's always a result of our actions. Like Henny Youngman, that one-liner, he said, a man goes to a psychiatrist, says, I've got no friends, Doc. You've got to help me, you big fat slob. That must be the reason he had no friends. Call them names. We don't see the relationship between what we do and what results. What is worse? What could possibly be worse than being crippled or sick as this man was for 38 years? He says, let nothing worse happen to you. The worst thing that could happen to you and me is eternally separated from God in a place of outer darkness. And that's the worst that could happen to anybody. And you don't want that to happen to you, so get out of the sin. Leave it. It's going to create worse consequences if you stay in it, so leave it. And we need to take the same advice. And while sin is not always the reason, it's not always the cause of disease, sometimes God does use sickness in the life to bring people back to Himself. It's a judgment of God upon those who will not listen. For instance, 1 Corinthians 11:30. For this cause many are weak and sickly among you, and many sleep. Why? Because they've been sinning. They're living in sin. A Christian group living in sin. So you're sleeping in death. God simply takes us out. There is sin unto death. Verse 15. The man revealed that, yes, it was Jesus. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him whole. Well, we ratted on him, okay? So the Jewish leaders in verse 16, what do? They turn around and persecute Jesus. Therefore did the Jews persecute Jesus and sought to slay him, kill him, because he had done these things on the Sabbath day. We began persecuting Jesus. Now what do? The word persecute there is the ako, which means to run after, to pursue, to chase. Well, what did they say? What did they talk to Jesus about when they chased after him? It doesn't say. But we figure out what they said because of what Jesus' response was in verse 17. His response reveals to them what they were saying. They were probably saying, you shouldn't be working on the Sabbath day. You're healing this man, you're working on the Sabbath day. That's probably what they said, or something close to it. Notice what Jesus said. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Why in the world would he say that? Because they were accusing him of working on the Sabbath day. They were accusing him of doing activity and working, and he wasn't supposed to do that. My Father is working until now. Now, there's a present indicative verbs there, which means they're continuous. They're not just a one-time thing, but continually. My Father is in the process of working until now. And I am working process. What does that mean? You see, God, for all history, since Adam, has been working to restore mankind to a relationship with Himself. You remember when Adam and Eve were in the garden and they had sinned? They took the forbidden fruit. The first thing they did, they made garments for themselves, and then they hid themselves from God. And what happened? God couldn't find them. Came to the garden and hollered their name, and where are you? Well, can't find you. God was looking for Adam and Eve. God was looking for them. God pursued after them. God took the initiative to go get them. And He's been doing that ever since. His godly role is pursuing after His people to bring them back into a proper relationship with Him. Now that sin separated Adam and Eve, separated from God. They knew they were naked. They had knowledge of spiritual things now. They had knowledge of their failure, and they've sinned. And every person who's been born from that time on receives that same capacity for sin. Receives that same sin nature. The moment we're conceived, that sin nature is transferred hereditarily into us. If you don't believe me, you check with a little baby sometime and see how they act and what they do, and they scream and carry on because they're little sinners. Now we don't look at that, oh, what a darling little sinner. We don't say that. But they are. And they have that inheritance of a sin nature. And as they grow older, you will find it becomes very prominent. There's I want this, and I'm going to do it my way, and that sin nature comes out in every one of us, no matter what age we are. God has been pursuing us from Adam and Eve to bring us back into that relationship that is right. And ever since, that's what God has been doing. God the Father has been seeking after the proper relationship. Jesus is saying, and I work, or am working, I am in the process of working. What he's saying is, I'm doing the very same thing that God is doing. What does that say? Me and God, my Father, and I, we're doing the same thing. We are equal, making God equivalent to Jesus. That sure made them mad. And they sought to kill him. Notice verse 18. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him. They want that even infuriated them more. Because he not only had broken the Sabbath, violating their man-made 39 rules, broken the Sabbath, but also said that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. You see, the Jewish folks would say, they would never say, my God. They would never say, my Father. They would say, our Father. And Jesus didn't say that, our Father. Our Father in heaven, yes, we know he is God. They sought to kill him. Because of Sabbath breaking, minor incident, but to them very big, but also blasphemy. My Father implies a special relationship with the Son and the Father. No Jew would ever call him my Father. They would say, our Father. And then working together with Father, with the Heavenly Father, doing the things which God is doing, pursuing the mankind and the relationship, would imply that he's on the same level. The Son, the Father, same level, doing the same work, doing the things that God is working toward, the salvation of men. Now here's the key conclusion for the miracle. This is an initial impetus here to kill Jesus. We find it in verse 18. They wanted to kill him. From this point on, in John's Gospel, you see it mentioned again in chapter 7, verse 1, verse 19, chapter 8, verse 37, verse 40, chapter 11, verse 53. Every time it keeps reminding, they wanted to kill Jesus. The opposition begins its efforts. Because of what Jesus did, because of what Jesus said. This opens the door, you might say, to all the opposition that's still on its way, is coming in the future. And eventually will take him to the cross. G. Campbell Morgan, that great writer and preacher of the previous century, said, on the human level, what Jesus did that day and what he said that day cost him his life. They never forgave him. What he did, what he said, cost him his life. Now that's the human level. Obviously there's a divine level as well. God had purpose in this. They never forgave him for what he said. My Father, the relationship working together, they couldn't take it anymore. But it's interesting what Jesus is doing here. In all these events, his healing, miracles, and powerful physical things going on, he was fulfilling the Old Testament prophecies. The very clear statements in Isaiah 53 about Jesus was being occasioned by what Jesus was doing. He bore our griefs and carried our sorrows, implying that the healing's here. Jesus is doing that. The healings from the one who would be wounded for our transgressions, the one who would be bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace would be upon him. And by His stripes we are healed. There's spiritual healing. And He's showing it by the physical healing of a man by the Bethesda pool. Friend, He can heal your spiritual condition. The sinfulness in your life, if you'll continue walking in it, will eventually destroy you. Worse will happen to you, but it can be forgiven, it can be cleansed because of Jesus. Because of what He did for us on the cross. He paid the penalty in full. And the reason He could do it was He's not just a man, He was the God-man. The combination of the eternal God and the human person. Because He is eternal, it is sufficient for all people for all time to come to that cross and to come to that sufficient payment for sin. The punishment has been done. It's been taken by Jesus. I need to respond to that and accept what He's done. I can walk away and say, well, it's not for me. But what Jesus did for you is enough. If you don't choose to accept it, you can say, no, I'm not going to do that. It's upon your life. It's upon your responsibility. And you will face judgment, divine judgment, as a result. Let's bow together. Our Heavenly Father, we thank You again for reminding us of the power of Your miracle working. In a man unnamed here, but a man who was healed. But a man also who experienced the healing and the conflict developing here. Lord, we live in a world of conflict, a world that doesn't understand, that mocks and laughs at these things as if they're mythological stories. But Lord, we thank You that in Christ, the truth of the gospel, the message of Christ, His forgiving and healing hand in our lives, the spiritual new life is available. Right now in the quietness of your heart, you may be saying, well, I need this. I need Christ. I need His touch in my life and the word He utters for me to set me free from my sin. When I look at my life and realize there are consequences for my sin and I'm dealing with it now, I want the forgiveness that You offer in Christ. And by faith, I turn from my sin. I admit to You that I am a lost sinner. I cannot save myself, just as that impotent man could not get in the water himself. And as Jesus, I turn to Jesus and Jesus alone to bring healing to my life, to set me free, to give me new life, to make me a brand new person. Thank You, Lord. Thank You for hearing my prayer and for answering my prayer. Lord, I ask You now to help me to do publicly that which I've done in my heart. To give my life and my heart to Jesus. In all this we pray, in the blessed name of our Savior, Lord Jesus. Amen. Our invitation hymn is extended to you as an opportunity to say, yes, I want to follow Christ. I want to become a member of this church through baptism or any way we need to respond to transfer your membership to somewhere else. If God is speaking your heart about it, you respond. As we sing number 325, Why Did It Snow? As we sing, let it be your prayer to the Lord as you give your life to Him. Reach to the front if you need to respond. Let's all stand together. 325.